Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Alex Merriweather. On behalf of our bookstore, I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's program, part of our new Voices in Fiction series presented with Grove Street, with Jonathan Galassi discussing his novel Muse in conversation with Helene Atwan. Jonathan Galassi is an accomplished poet and translator, a former Guggenheim Fellow and poetry editor for the Paris Review, and he is the president and publisher of the internationally renowned publishing firm Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. Please join me in welcoming Helene Atwan and Jonathan Galassi.
What a delightful introduction. And I have to start. Okay, I can't help myself. I have to start by reading the back ad of this book. Those of you in publishing know the back ad is what it says on the back cover. And it's a poem. It says, Muse, a novel about writers' secrets, publishers' obsessions, manuscripts, love, loyalty, and betrayal, and the most gifted, glamorous, and elusive writer of her generation. Isn't that beautiful? Did you write that?
No. I wish I had. No, it was written by the Australian publisher of this book.
Wow.
He wrote that copy, and he's a genius.
Well, apparently. So what I love about this book is that it is so many things, and there are so many pieces of it. And what I really want to ask you to do is read the whole thing. Start at the beginning and just read it to us, because it's so full of wonders.
We might lose the audience.
Oh, I don't know about that, but but I've had great fun with it, especially because, of course, we have this history together at Purcell. At Farrar, Straus, and Giroux.
Helen was present at the creation. She didn't know it at the time, neither did I, but she was there. We worked together for a good long time, and she's seen a lot.
Right.
So.
But you know where actually all the skeletons lay,
But this is fiction.
That's true. There is that. But what there is in this fiction that I think is extraordinary and so compelling for all of us, those of us who know the world of publishing and those who don't, is just how much of the book is about a passion for books, a passion for words, and in particular, a passion for poetry. And we have some wonderful poets in the audience tonight, so that's particularly appropriate, including you.
I'm not in the audience, though.
Well, that's true. You were a moment ago. So with us tonight, we have some wonderful poets. I'd love for you to read the opening of the book, just to give people a little bit of a flavor of it. Would you do that?
Sure. Before I do, I'd like to thank you for agreeing to spend this time with us, and to thank Harvard Bookstore, which is one of the best bookstores in the country, and which represents the attitude to publishing and bookselling that is sort of idealized in this book. In fact, an independent bookseller is a character and a heroine in the book. So
that is true.
I'll read from the first chapter. And the story is about two old line publishers, the last of their breed, really, who came from wealth, decided to be publishers. They were the so-called gentleman publishers, though they weren't always so gentlemanly.
But do you want to tell that old joke about the way to make a small fortune in book publishing?
Is to take a large one.
Start with a large one, yes.
I forgot that. That's not in the book. It should be.
No, it should be.
So the book opens at Purcell & Stern, which is a company that is run by Homer Stern, one of these publishing grandees. Homer and Company. And Homer is famously vulgar. I'm just warning you. So The peasants. That ancient cry off the Russian steppe was the trademark toast of Homer Stern, founder, president, and publisher of the Tony, impecunious independent publishing house Purcell and Stern. He raised a glass with it often at dinners celebrating his author's victories, or better yet, defeats, after the numerous award ceremonies that punctuate the publishing year. Homer's salute to his warriors divided the world cleanly into us and them. Or maybe it was me and them, a spot-on reflection of his Hun-like worldview. Homer was a womanizer, and he made no particular effort to hide it. It was part of the broad advertisement of self that some found disarming and just as many detested. To his fellows, his frank appreciation of female horseflesh jibed with his loud, nasal, upper-class New York accent and his loud, expensive clothes. On him they looked good, Carrie Donovan allowed in the pages of Harper's Bazaar. And his taste for Cuban cigars and Mercedes convertibles. It had taken him years to buy a German car after the war, but his fondness for luxury and display eventually won out over any lingering historical or religious compunctions. Homer exuded a kind of leftover, gently down at the heels German-Jewish droit du seigneur that was only slightly put on. He'd inherited it from his father, the grandson of a lumber baron who'd made a fortune out west when the first transcontinental railroad needed ties by the boxcar. That was a long time ago, though, and the Stern family coffers were nowhere near as full of dollars as they had been after 3 generations of dilution without replenishment. As with many who live on inherited wealth, Homer's sense of what money can buy hadn't kept pace with inflation. He was a famously chintzy tipper. Still, he reveled in the bella figura that let him give the impression of being much better off than he was. He once told his son Plato that looking rich made it easier to put off paying his printing bills. His printer of choice, Sonny Lenzner, would always assume he could pay up when he got around to it. As his wife, Iphigene Abrams, likewise an heiress to a faded Newark department store fortune, was quoted as saying, not without pride, "Homer likes nothing better than walking a tightrope over the abyss." Stern was the last of the independent gentleman publishers, scions of Industrial Revolution fortunes of greater or lesser magnitude, who decided to spend what remained of their inheritance on something that was fun for them and perhaps generally worthwhile too. College right after the war, he'd attended a series of institutions of descending degrees of seriousness, always managing to get himself thrown out before graduation. Was followed by a stint in the Army's public relations branch, where he'd done his damnedest to sell enlistment via jingle and poster to a conflict-weary public. He'd also acquired a penchant for inventive profanity, which, combined with the Yiddishisms he'd picked up later on when he and Iphigene got interested in their Jewish roots, made for a delicious idiomatic goulash all his own. When Homer set out in the dark days of the 50s to start a publishing house with Hayden Vanderpool, a wealthy WASP tennis buddy of his, he'd invited Frank Purcell, like the composer, Frank invariably said on being introduced, in case someone might mistakenly put the accent on the second syllable, to join them. Frank was a once celebrated editor from an older generation who'd been unceremoniously cut loose from his previous job while he was off in Korea. In the end, Vanderpool's mother had objected to his linking his impeccable name with the Jews, and Hayden hadn't wanted to work 9 to 5 anyway, so it was just Homer and Frank, Stern and Purcell, or Purcell and Stern as Frank had insisted, reasonably enough. They set up shop and waited for something to happen. Eventually something had. The fledgling company struggled along for a while on the occasional commercial bestseller, Nutrition Bibles, and the collected speeches of various governors and secretaries of state. Remember, this was the 50s, with now and then a high-toned foreign novel, recommended by one or another of Homer's European scouts, pals from his army days, now working, some muttered sotto voce, as undercover operatives for the CIA. It wasn't until the mid-60s, though, that Homer convinced Georges Savoy, a French émigré with a genuine feeling for writing and a well-stocked stable, acquired during a productive but turbulent career at Owl House, to come work with him and Frank. That Purcell and Stern gelled. Soon enough, through the alchemical fusion of Georges' taste and connections with Homer's salesmanship, not to mention the contributions of a series of young staffers who slaved 12 or 14 hours a day at abysmal wages for the privilege of being associated with greatness. That was us. P&S emerged as a force to contend with in literary publishing, a kind of rocket of originality. P&S surprisingly quickly became a legend in publishing circles, and that was where the trouble between Homer and Sterling Wainwright began. P&S came to be regarded as the smallest, scrappiest, and most literary of the major publishers, while Wainwright's Impetus Editions, for all its cultural impact and influence, was considered the largest and most esteemed of the small presses, another world altogether. And though Homer was stingy with author advances, Impetus was cheaper still, much, much cheaper. Even so, there was significant overlap, and when the cocky young Jewish-American writer Byron Hummock left Impetus for P&S after the publication of his prize-winning book of stories, All Around Sheboygan, war was declared, and it had never ended. Wainwright, a card-carrying wasp from Ohio whose inheritance, ball bearings, trumped Stearns by a factor of 10, some said much more, regarded Homer as a crass and ill-mannered upstart opportunist, not a man of his word. A time-honored defense for someone who's been bested in the rough and tumble of business. Homer derided Sterling as a playboy, indulging his literary pretensions without any practical acumen or publishing savvy, which was kind of rich when you thought about it, given Homer's own background. No, the trouble was not what separated Sterling and Homer, it was how alike they were. Both were spoiled, handsome, charming ladies' men with a nose for writers. You might have thought they'd be natural pals, but you'd have been dead wrong. They cordially detested each other and greatly enjoyed doing so. Homer's team, I'm skipping ahead here a little. Here, Homer's editorial staff was a raggle-taggle gathering of talented misfits, many of whom he'd scooped up on the beach, always at a considerable discount, after they'd been let go by more hard-nosed mainstream houses, starting with Frank and Georges. Each had succumbed to Homer's spell in one way or another. Portly Patty Femer, an exceptionally gifted editor whose perfectionism made it nearly impossible for him to let go of the manuscripts he noodled over, sometimes for years. Cadaverous Elsa Pogorsky, known around the office as Morticia, invariably dressed in black from head to toe and forever scowling through forbidding black glasses. One of Homer's nuns of publishing, who sat resentfully at her desk all day correcting the numberless translations of unsaleable story writers and poets from the other Europe that Abe Burek and others were constantly pressing on Homer. She's laughing because she had to publicize these books. Crotchety, heart of gold copy chief Esperanza Esparza, renowned for her way with a red pencil, who seemed never to leave her desk surrounded by its array of scraggly avocado and spider plants that leached all the available light from her grimy office window. Homer's team was united in subservient loyalty to their larger-than-life leader, whose paternal insouciance made them feel sundown for once in their lives, essential players in an enterprise of unquestionable significance. His allegro benevolence was like catnip. Why, it was nearly as good as money. So they beavered away while he sat back with his feet on his desk like an overdressed Tom Sawyer, smiling his toothy smile and entertaining himself, placing troublemaking calls to agents and journalists. "Who do I have to blow to get Burak's new book reviewed, baby?" He'd jaw to his sidekick Florian Brundage, affectionately known as Chowderhead, the Daily Blade's chief book critic and perhaps not incidentally a P&S novelist, picking his teeth all the while. "Your piece on that cow I'm too refined to mention, Hortense Houlihan." To tell the truth, Homer made use of a coarser, unprintable epithet. Was shit, and you know it. Miraculously, books emerged from P&S's Augean stables. Usually they won kudos, often they won prizes, and now and again they sold reasonably well. Sometimes working for Homer was peaches and cream. Occasionally it was infuriating, but mostly it was kind of fun. All you had to do was accept that it was Homer's shop, 100%. There were no office politics at P&S because he decided everything. So people, those who lasted, relaxed and homed in on their work, endlessly complaining about the peremptory, ungrateful, self-involved authors whose writing they idolized. They were utterly mad, of course, but they did their level best to ignore one another's foibles, since they were the same as their own. And to many of them, the cramped, filthy offices on Union Square were a mind-bending, topsy-turvy little heaven on earth.
So true. So true. Every word of it is true.
It's fiction. It's fiction. I wish I could find the description of the dirty, the filthy linoleum that was waxed.
Oh, yes. I marked that somewhere. I know I did. Because they did. They waxed over the dirt. Because you didn't get both the wash and the wax. You could just afford the ones. Yeah, those were, I remember first walking into those offices. I had been working at Viking Press at the time, and I got a call to come for an interview at Farrar, Straus, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. And I arrived in the offices, and the elevator door opened, and I thought, I must be in the wrong place. I let the elevator door close. I went back. I checked again. And they were pretty grimy offices, yeah. Calvin Trillin made fun of them. Tom Wolfe made fun of them.
Calvin Trillin called them, it looked like the branch office of a failing insurance
Yes,
company.
yeah.
I always thought it looked like a porn magazine.
Tom Wolfe claimed that Homer Stern had paid a lot of money to have the walls painted to look as though they hadn't been painted in 20 years. Which is probably true. That they hadn't been painted.
This is what they call color, the colorful era.
Yes.
The color was dinge.
But we felt so good about it. We felt so good about having furniture that we had scraped together from God knows where until the day that Carlos Fuentes sat down on the chair in my office and the chair collapsed underneath him. And that was a very bad moment because one didn't want Carlos Fuentes to fall down on the floor. It was just not a good thing. And isn't it true that Scott Turow bought you office furniture because he was so tired?
He bought me a table, I think it's true.
Yes.
And Susan Sontag bought me a pencil sharpener, which I still use.
Wow. Electric?
Yes.
Oh, well, that was going all out then. And is it true that Susan Sontag and Roger, a.k.a. Homer, wore matching leather jackets? I never saw that.
I saw that.
You
I
did?
saw that.
You
When I was first introduced to them, I was not working at
Oh.
FSG at that time, but I was introduced to them, and they were sitting side by side wearing matching leather jackets. Yes.
It was a heady age. It was a time when books were books, right? And they weren't electronic, digitized objects, but physical, beautiful physical objects.
Well, this is pretty beautiful.
It is.
I think real books remain as appealing to many people as ever, and I don't think they're going to go away. Not in our lifetime.
Yeah, or maybe
So-
ever.
Or ever,
If we're
yeah.
lucky.
So-
Because ebooks have kind of leveled off, so that's good. Now, at the end of the book, you actually have a riff on that.
Yes, I have a section where the protagonist of the book is a young editor named Paul Dukac, who grows up in the course of the book, and he apprentices himself to Homer, and he works for Sterling. Well, he becomes friends with Sterling Wainwright too, and he's caught between these two father figures who don't like each other, which makes him very uncomfortable. But he eventually eventually ends up running the company, and he has to deal with the vicissitudes of the digital revolution.
And he literally and figuratively gets in bed with
That's
the
true. He
evil
sleeps.
empire.
He sleeps with the enemy. That's true.
Yes, with the-
But I don't want to give that away.
No, that's true. Sorry. Forget you heard that. Just read the book and let it. It was very hard for me to read the book without making notes about who I thought all the characters were. And some of you will be wanting to do that, particularly the poets.
But I think they're not meant. Though some insiders like you might think they recognize certain traits in these people. They're supposed to be types, character types, and there's a lot about how the publishing staff views the authors, and because they feel that the authors don't really see them as people. But at the same time, they revere them and they love their work, and that dichotomy is part of the truth of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So-
And it is true that we were all working for slave wages, maybe not quite slave wages, but pretty darn close. And I remember Roger on hot days, because invariably the AC was not very reliable at 19 Union Square West, right? When nothing was reliable, linoleum was falling apart. He would go out and buy a whole bunch of
Ice creams.
Ice pop, and bring them up and distribute them to the staff. Because, hey, I know the AC isn't great, but look at me. I'm giving you free ice pops.
Here, I'm going to just read this description of the office. Do you want me to read that?
Yes, please. That will bring me back.
Paul had felt at home the moment he'd walked into the boxed-in, ill-lit P&S lobby. The place looked more like his idea of the offices of a porn magazine. There seemed to be one upstairs, down the hall from the rehab center on the 8th floor. Then a temple of contemporary literature. A broken couch and frosted glass dividers fought for attention with certificates for the National Book Awards, Pulitzer Prizes, and National Book Critics Circle Awards won by House authors, appended helter-skelter over the receptionist's rickety desk alongside less prepossessing announcements like the American Book Designers Federation 1969 honorable mention for typography. Remember that? P&S specialized in Nobel Prizes, in fact, but there were no plaques for them, just the gold medals that Paul had noticed on Homer's desk during their interviews. Later that morning, he was given a cubicle on the south side of the hallway. Homer had called it a nice office with a window at lunch. Equipped with a boxy Korean computer console and a telephone, both of which appeared to be in working order. Manuscripts from literary agents would show up in neat gray or powder blue boxes on his pockmarked old-school desk, or in battered manila envelopes if they were coming from writers without representation, and he'd read through them with a requisite show-me detachment. In 90% of cases, you could tell within a page or two whether the writer could write, 90% of the time, box or no box, he or she could not. Every so often, though, the words would cohere, the sentences would follow on one another with lockstep plausibility, and Paul would begin to feel an unsettling combination of elation and fear. Elation at the linguistic and psychological aptness of what he was reading, and fear as he went on, that this undeniably gifted writer would veer off and spoil her creation before he could finish the stack of pages. That's what it was like.
That's what it was like when you first read, for example, Jonathan Franzen or Jeff Eugenides.
Yes,
Want
absolutely.
to talk a little bit about?
Yes, it's true. Or Scott Turo's book. I remember Presumed Innocent. I remember it came in right after I got there, and I sat there and read the pages, and got more and more excited and fearful. And I remember saying, if the judge did it, I won't be able to publish the book. So that was fun.
We won't tell you who did it. You have to read the book.
It wasn't the judge.
It was not the judge, though. Now, there were so many wonderful moments like that when you would share a manuscript and it would just, take my breath away. I couldn't believe what a fabulous discovery you'd just made. So many of those
we shouldn't do too much more of this, but I thought I would switch to another part of the book, which is the poetry part.
Yes.
Which is what happens in the book is that Paul, who like his boss and his other mentor, they're all obsessed with a poet whose name is Ida Perkins, who is published by Impetus, the small press, but Homer has always coveted her as an author, and Paul has always been obsessed with her. And this book, let's say, it's counterfactual in that in the world of muse, poetry is hugely commercial. Poets are greatly popular.
I call that fantasy. Counterfactual works.
and this is my revenge on the reality of publishing. and so Paul wangles, by nefarious means, wangles an invitation to go visit Ida Perkins, who is living in seclusion in her 80s in Venice. And when I say that Paul, one of the chapters of the later chapters is called Publishing Scoundrel, you'll know where that comes from the Aspirin Papers, which takes place in Venice. And so Venice is sort of overdetermined as a locale for this. But Ida gives Paul her last manuscript, to his shock and enormous excitement. And I can't reveal certain things about the manuscript, but let's just say that the plot turns on the manuscript and the poems in it, and everything changes drastically because of his possession of this book. But I thought I would read you a few of the poems in the manuscript, because this is a book about poetry too. And as I say, in this counterfactual world, the poems have beauty, import, significance, plot. The world turns on poetry, and that's part of my revenge.
And the book sells 750,000 copies. Figure that sticks in my head.
Some people just can't go there, but
We would all like to go there.
the book is called Mnemosyne, which is the name of the Titaness who is the mother of the muses and the goddess of memory. And the book is a lot about memory, and so Mnemosyne, which is Ida Perkins' book of memory of very significant relationship, last love affair of hers. These are some of the poems. The first one is called Mnemosyne Remembers. Mnemosyne remembers, it's her job. The stationary heat, the glare, the trance, the listless lob, then evening coming on, cool cardigan on ramrod shoulders, sharp myopic stare across the meadow where the great man's sheep browse as in an underwater dream. No stars. The tipsy stumble down the hill in utter darkness. Then the age-old dance, hand held and no stitch dropped, but one word said. Mnemosyne was there. The only thing she does is this, recall. It's what she does. It's who she is. That's all. I'll read a few more. This one is called I Waited. I waited in the sunlight by the water, waited in the breeze to hear the rustle in the parted grass, to see the towel fall on the chair, the body sink beside me and unfold, the silver voice remind me I was there. I might have dozed, but I don't think I did. I was so dazed with waiting I got lost in time without you. Time I have no way of clawing back, stale time that swivels counterclockwise down the drain, time that crystallizes pain, time that isn't life or air, foul time that doesn't move but disappears. I waited in the sun all afternoon. I waited on the dock till it was cold. And when I raised my head up, I was old. And I'll read two more. One is comes up later, but no, I can't. It's well, I'll just read. I can't find it. I'll read.
Looking for the last poem?
No, well, the last one poem, but there's another one I wanted to find. No. Anyway, I'll read the last poem. This is the last poem, last thing in the book, actually, except for the bibliography of Ida's poetry.
Yes, I love that.
But this is the last poem. The last thing in the book. It's called Goldenrod. Mnemosyne remembers as she sits and stares across the water every day. Hard as she tries, she finds there's no reprise. Far too much evades her failing eyes. But always she sees hair and forehead, lips meeting lips and skin on ageless skin. She summons its faint mineral scent and knows what she remembers isn't sin. And though she can't have back each gone embrace, each breath, each hopeless kiss, she knows she does own this. The last time that she watched you turn to trace your footsteps through the goldenrod, she remembers that she heard you call, miss you, darling, see you in the fall. Mnemosyne remembers that was all. So these are her poems about loss, about memory and stuff. So the book starts out in this satirical mode of the publishing world, and then it moves inward into what publishing is about, which is about art and literature. And Ida is kind of she's the central elusive presence in the book, and some have said that she's really the spirit of literature, and I think that was an interesting observation. So.
Well, she's definitely not one person.
She's many people to different people. So, but then he does finally meet her, and she is somebody, but she's not what anyone expected, or what he expected her to be. So I think we should.
Yeah, let people ask questions and talk about the book. So unless you raise your hand quickly, I might have to ask the first question. I have to ask you, what did it feel like? Now, you've had 3 books of poetry, but in my experience, poetry is a light editorial touch. Fiction is different. I'm sure your own experience of editing fiction is different. What was it like?
To be edited?
And yes, to write a novel and then be edited as a
Well, I had a
fiction.
very involved editor,
Ah.
and she put me through my paces. She edited me very, she was always pushing me to make the book more realistic, which, because it's, as I said, it's a kind of fantasy or counterfactual, but it works as well as it does, I think, because she, Robin Desser is her name, because she encouraged me to make it as real as I could. So
Within
she was terrific.
Oh, that's good. So you didn't get, like, don't change my
I
stuff.
didn't say that. I resisted. I resisted.
That's
But
always-
it was very, in fact, I think so many times with books, you learn to write the book by writing it, and by the time you're at the end, you sort of know what you're doing, and then you have to go back and fix the beginning of the book, and I'm sure I could do more fixing, but books are never finished; they're abandoned. So
Oh, that's an interesting idea.
That's-
I give up. I've done as much as I can with this.
that's someone said that about poetry, but it's true of books too.
Yeah. Although so many of the books that you have edited have seemed so absolutely perfect to me.
Well, that is such a nice thing to say, Helen, and I'm sure the authors appreciate it very much. But you know, things always look better in type.
Yes,
than
it's
they do.
true.
Somehow they gain authority when you see them in type.
I think that's why we like them so much when they're printed books as opposed to perhaps digital books. All right, now it really is your turn. I was going to ask Jonathan if he would actually read one of the poems that he's written in his own voice as opposed to Ida's voice. So I'm going to ask him if he would do that, and then after that, it will be your turn. But you can read anything you like. I just had picked one.
This is a book. This is my last poetry book, which does have a narrative spine to it, which probably led me towards trying to write fiction. I don't really know what to read, but here, I'll read this one, which it's not the one you wanted me
That's
to read, but this is a poem. It's called Barred Owl Song, and it's a kind of ballad. The barred owl says what's repeated in the poem. The refrain is what the barred owl says. If a man is his desire, if a man is his desire, if a man is his desire, who cooks for you? If a man has been on fire, if a man has been on fire, I say, if a man has been on fire, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? If a man has walked a wire, if a man has walked a wire, I say, if a man has walked a wire, will it lead to his desire? Was it why he was on fire? Tell me what's true, and who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? If a man has been a liar, if a man has been a liar, I say, if a man has been a liar, was it that he was on fire? Did he misconstrue desire? Tell me what's true, and who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? If a man has worn a wire, if a man has worn a wire, I say, If a man has worn a wire passing through the hardest fire that was burning his desire, can he stay up on the wire? Does it mean he is a liar? Tell me what's true, and who cooks for you? Who cooks for you? Ida would not have written that poem. The book is satirical, but as one reviewer said, gently satirical. I don't think it's mean. I bet. Well, Helen can. It's cartoonish in the sense that cartoonish is maybe not fair, but it exaggerates. Comedy always exaggerates things, and so. But I think it's a loving portrayal.
Oh,
I think so.
I think
anyway.
Roger would have loved the book.
Really?
He would have loved the way he was portrayed because it's everything he kind of wanted to be: larger than life, outrageous. You know.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
I think
what
he
a
would
relief, Helen, to know that.
I think he would have really enjoyed it.
But it's not Roger, of course.
No.
What will you take from this experience of writing your first novel into potentially writing a second novel?
Well, I am trying to write another book that's totally different from this. But this was really, really fun to write. I did it as a challenge to see if I could write fiction. I wanted to put down a kind of record of a certain way of doing things that is really historical now. I loved these people. I loved the world that we lived in. Somehow, and then I loved creating her as a kind of foil, as a kind of representative of what we were all after, and having it come together was just very, very exciting and frustrating, and and I read it now and I think, oh, it could have been better, So, but the being able to embody something, however imperfectly, is such an exciting. I found it very, very exciting. I think that's and fun, really. I'm not having the book I'm trying to write now. It's not as much fun, but.
Do you want to say any more?
No,
No.
I'm not going to talk about it.
Just not as much fun. Yeah.
But I hope it'll be good. But Jonathan Franzen recently said something that was really opposite. He said that the more you write, the harder it gets, or the harder it should get, because you're peeling away layers. You're writing about the fun stuff, the easy stuff, and so as you go along, you have to try to deal with things that you don't want to talk about or don't want to, and that's what you have to do. And I think that was a very astute comment on his part.
That's good advice for the muse, don't you think, Chris? That you have to get down and
Right.
write about things.
Almost the last joke in the book is the fact that when looking at the bibliography, suddenly one comes across books that are going to be published in 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, not quite 20 years, but in 2020, yes.
Yes, well, and that was
The book-
very pleasurable. You talk about discovering that or deciding to do that.
The book goes from the 50s into the future, and the last chapter takes place in the future too. And again, that's the thing about fiction, or you can do whatever you want. It's counterfactual that way, and I just thought that part of the point is that the poet's work goes on into an immortality of its own. It goes into the future. So I wanted to show that, and the bibliography sort of proves that people are going to be noodling over Ida Perkins' work.
One thing, it's just a pleasure in seeing a bibliography listing a book published in 2020. And it's really deadpan, it's very nice.
But I did you notice that it was Medusa as the name of the big company?
Amazon.
Yeah. So it was Purcell and Stern's slash Medusa that was the publisher. So,
That's the ultimate.
so, yes,
But
well,
also Paul, the character, has commissioned a biography that then will be published.
he writes his own book about her, and then he edits her uncollected poems, and these are things that aren't in the book, but in the book he's writing this book about her, but there are other things in the bibliography that aren't mentioned that, so. But a bibliography is, for someone who's a fanatic about writing, what is more fun than a bibliography? It's the
And there's so
the
many
card.
fun
Do you remember the
details.
card catalogs that we used to?
Yeah.
They were so wonderful. Yeah.
And this book industry statistics show that readership is not shrinking. And particularly, the only place where it's shrinking, really a kind of interesting fact when you think about, people are giving up books, people are not reading books anymore. It's actually at the very bottom of the people who used to read 3 or 4, maybe 5 books a year. They may not be reading so many. They may be only reading 1 or none. But the people who were up here reading 15, 20 books, they're reading 20, 25. They're up because they can now read a book in print, of course. They can also read books. I know almost everybody I know reads ebooks now. Even if they prefer print books, they read ebooks because they're
both.
traveling. Yeah, they read both. They're traveling, so they take their e-reader on the trip, and then they have a pile of books at home. And many, many people are starting to listen to books as well. So the digital download audio has become now a really significant, grew 27% last year. So we have a whole new group of readers who are listening to books. So I'm encouraged by all that, and our numbers look good, fragmented, but a lot of readers.
When you talk about fragmentation, to me what comes to mind is how the poetry section, the poetry readership has always been very, very fragmented. And so maybe fiction market is more like the poetry reading market than it used to be.
Yeah. And nonfiction, of course, has always been pretty fragmented because you have, interest groups, but even within the interest group, there's just been a lot more. But it does mean that, many more voices are heard, many more titles are out, and there are more titles. And that makes it hard. There's certain categories that are getting really hard, like memoir. Memoir is painful.
One of the things that's most difficult in publishing now is that the discussion of books in newspapers and all is less. I mean, there's more blog discussion, there's more online discussion, but discoverability is one of the big problems for publishers. And bookstores like this they're our showrooms as well as our sales rooms. We need places where you all can sniff the books and be seduced by the jackets, or
introduced to something
and
new.
seeing a little thing online is not. I mean, if you look at this book online, it doesn't have the absolute beauty that it does. So.
That's true, and we think about that when we're designing jackets a lot. What you now look at the jacket, and then you look at the jacket at this size, and then at this size, because you have to be aware that people are not necessarily
seeing it live.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's changed, and there are some things that I think we lament a lot, like more bookstores like this one. There should just be so many more like this one, and instead there are not so many. But there are also things to be celebrated, like the fact that books are available to people everywhere.
Well, and virtually all books are available to everyone now,
Yes.
which was certainly not the case when we were. I mean, it was. There are certain things that are sad about that, or that you could be nostalgic about, rummaging through old, used bookstores. But now you can find that book that sometimes you'd have to look for years for it.
Or if not, you just get them to print it out.
Well, there's so
'Cause
there's universal access, which is an amazing good.
Yeah, I know that in fact people have talked about the fact that certainly in certain categories for many years, so many books were so hard to get, especially books in LGBT category, and you just couldn't get them. You had to really work to get some of those books, and now they are so universally available. And as I said, they'll print out a copy for you right here while you wait. So that's a great gift.
Yes, sir.
John, are you planning to release an audio book of yours, or what goes into that decision to do it or not?
There is an audiobook of. I have not seen it yet, but they did. The Random House Audio decided to produce an audio edition of this.
So you mean you haven't heard it yet?
No, yes, and I haven't actually been presented with a copy of it yet, but it does exist. So.
Did you record it?
No, I didn't. It was done very fast, but yes, there is one. So.
Yeah, that is in the audio segment. You really have to have the book available simultaneously.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you lose your sales. People want the book now. So if they're going to listen to it, they want to be able to listen.
Well, they're going to hear about it when it's reviewed. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they want to be able to listen.
Sorry, how has the relationship between writers and publishers changed recently or since you began?
Well, I think that's a really, I think it's a complicated thing. In some ways, authors have demanded bigger. Some authors have been able to demand bigger pay days. A lot, but and some authors now are self-publishing. But I think that the big payday for certain kinds of, which is only a few books, but everyone talks about it, that doesn't allow for I think the thing that's most different, I don't know if you agree, is that what I remember doing, and it didn't always work, but it happened a lot, that you would work with an author book after book. They would build their career gradually over a couple of decades, and that was really how you built an audience, and it was a progression, and that's much harder to do today.
Because if at
for a lot
first
of
you
reasons.
don't succeed, then you're done.
A lot of books, they're sold for certain first novels are sold for a lot of money, and if they don't sell, then the author's really got a lot of difficulty. So I would say that it's a less paternalistic system in a certain way, but it's also there's less continuity, and so I'd say it's. I would say it's less congenial.
The other loss, I think, is with agents. I was talking about this just the other day, because literary agents were for so long very paternalistic, actually, or maternalistic, as was often the case, and they really, really cared about their authors, and they would, constantly be nagging the publisher about.
You don't think they're doing that now?
No, most of them are out selling the next book. I mean, they're throwing something against the wall to see if it'll stick. I'm amazed at how.
Well, the business is more. It's it's just not, this is about the good old days. And
Yeah.
it's not the good old days anymore. It's something else, and it's the rapacious new days, And but I think the rose-colored glasses that we
Well, that's
wear about this are, But I think it's somewhat more perilous for authors. That's what I would say. Bottom line.
New authors as well as more established authors?
I think certain new authors can take advantage of this competition among publishers, but I think that I still think developing a career over time is the best for their work long term, and that's harder to do. So. What?
What a loss.
It is a loss, I think. I think it is a loss.
Well, thank you both
Thank
so much.
you.
She started screaming then, calling them every name in the book, shouting, TDC, TDC, threat, duress, and coercion, over and over again, even as the female forced open the door and took hold of her by the left arm, and Kucha, good dog, faithful dog, went right at her.